Up next, How to Be a Boss. Dealmakers, Deciders, Disruptors, presented by Loeb and Loeb. Please welcome to the stage Raquel Harris, Ann Kennedy McGuire, Carolyn Monetta, Mika Price, Sophia Amoruso, and Tana Nugent Jameson.
All right, are you guys excited to hear about how to be a boss? I was gonna say, make some noise. So before we get into who you guys are as bosses today, we're gonna take it back, way back into time. Before you had your title, what did being a boss mean to you? What did it look like? And how did that shape you as a worker at the time? Mika, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think being a boss tended to look pretty homogenous, right? It tended to be males. I know that a lot of the folks I've worked for have been men, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but tended, as I work at Paramount Pictures, I've been wanting to be in entertainment for a long time, and sort of at the top of any professional field, I think you tend to see the same versions of people. Not a lot of diversity, not a lot of women. And so for me, that's what that looked like, just not seeing a lot of myself reflected back at me. And so as a result, I felt like what I had to do was just do everything. Like I had to, if there was a writer who'd written a script, I had to have read it before anyone else. I had to have met that person before anyone else. I had to be tracking everything. I had to be, I always felt like I had to be sort of proving myself and the reason for me to be in whatever room. And so that was the thing that I felt like I could control, and the thing that I did and sort of clock that I could do while coming up, even if the rooms didn't necessarily look like me. So that's what it felt like, and that's sort of how I approached it as a junior and on my way up.
I think it's so funny, like your answer is my exact answer. Totally male. There was very few, even mid-level female executives at that point. And I kind of found it just made me put my head down, work as hard as I could so I could get, to the next level. So that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I came up in a law firm, so that's like the most hierarchical, most male room you're ever going to be in. So it was the exact same answer. Put your head down, and then just keep looking for opportunities and looking for those people who are willing to mentor you, are willing to be your sponsors, are willing to, point you in the right direction at least.
I thought that being a boss was telling people what to do and managing them and just getting the job done. But that's not the thing that people show up to do. That's not the thing that people respond to. It's not the thing that motivates them. And I learned the hard way that it's about leadership. Managing is table stakes, and leadership is the thing that's going to make somebody feel like their job is more than a job. And trusting and deputizing people and allowing them to make decisions and make mistakes and go solve problems and bring the potential solutions to you instead of trying to solve all of the problems for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, very similar. I think there was a diversity challenge, but I think, at my company, it's pretty horizontal. You're an assistant, or you're an agent, or you're a partner, and so it's just very clear in those rooms, I think, coming up, like who was going to be leading those rooms, who was going to be deferring to that person in the room, and then over time, that model flips a little bit, but there was a little bit of a need to kind of, at least internally, make sure I knew what I was doing, knew what I was saying, and be a little bit extraordinary in those rooms to progress.
I was going to say, you knew what you were doing because you started as a production assistant on Weeds on Netflix and worked your way from this entry-level job to this leadership role. Would you say that staying at that job for a longer period of time helped you in that? Or just break down how that all happened, from you applying for the PA job and then now becoming this executive?
So, there wasn't really an application process. I was volunteering at the Vancouver International Film Festival where Jen G was a speaker, and I approached her and sort of asked her, how to get your foot in the door, and she gave me her assistant's number if I were ever to be in LA, which I was the next week. And they kind of created an internship for me, and that was parlayed into a production assistant job. But from there, I quickly learned that that's sort of there's a clear path there, in terms of the DGA and how you work yourself up to first AD, and that wasn't necessarily the path for me, and it was recommended that I, apply to an agency to at least, that's a hub of information flow, and then you can kind of figure out what to do from there, and get that experience. And so I started in the mailroom at WME, and worked for a couple of agents, ended up kind of falling into the brand partnerships group, and kind of loved the nature of that transactional business. And then at the time, YouTube was sort of nascent, but there were these burgeoning personalities, and they, the only kind of transactional business they were doing were brand partnerships. And so I just really made a business case to kind of represent those talent and treat them as talent in their own right. And at the time, sort of I created a low-risk environment to do that, sort of act as an agent, and not as an agent while not being an agent. And I created the market created a need for that, and that eventually led to my promotion, and then a need to apply resources against that, which I then led that group.
Come on.
Essentially.
I was gonna say, give it up. That's exceptional. Staying at a company is not the norm anymore. A lot of times people like to try different things. They're exploring new options. Per the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average employee stays at a job for a little over 4 years. And as millennials kind of kicked it off, and Gen Z, kept the baton going, people are leaving jobs for over like 2 years. For Tana and Ann, you guys have been at your companies for well over a decade. What's the benefit of staying at a company for a longer period of time, and do you feel like that led you to where you are today?
I've been at Loeb for almost 15 years now, so defying the stats apparently.
Okay.
But that's because, I saw a need for a podcast practice group, and that it was very similar to what we did in the unscripted side, and that we could take option, similar to talent, we could option work from podcasters, and we could, make those into film and TV the same way we could make any book or any other piece of content into film or TV. So that's how I started it, 6 or 7 years ago, working for NPR and helping them have their works optioned. And then from that, there was a need, and the market created it, like you said, a need for lawyers to be in that podcast space. And because I already sort of had a foot in the door, I said, great, we can represent podcasters in talent deals and distribution deals, and very much the same deals that we do on the unscripted side. So, and having the support from my company to do that and to give me a platform and, like you said, apply resources against that was invaluable to build both the television and the podcast practice. So I think it's staying somewhere, building those relationships, finding those mentors and sponsors that believe in you to take risks like that. I think it can be valuable if you can stay in the same place for long enough to create those.
That's a really important point, is sort of like making it known to people that can support you, that you're betting on this business or whatever it is, and making it about the collective. And so I assume you sort of educated the organization about the landscape.
What it is, and how we can be in that place, and how it makes business sense to be in that place, I think. But I think it takes being somewhere for a while to build that credibility, so people believe you and agree with you that they want to take that bet on you. So,
I've been at A&E for close to a little longer than Ann has, and I think for me it's worked out beautifully because I was brought over as a buyer for network programming at A&E. I did Bates, Longmire, I did all these scripted shows. They worked out beautifully. I thought I was going to be a buyer for the rest of my life. I loved it, and then they shut the network. They shut the scripted side of the network down. And they said, hey, you want to go over to the studio? So I was like, I'm not quite sure if that's really, in the cards for me. I did it. It's been the greatest experience I've ever had. It's, selling shows to all kinds of different buyers. To your point, Rocky, why do you stay? I'm learning something every day. It's been fantastic. And I think if you can stay at a company that you could continue to grow and trust people. It's ideal, as opposed to every 4 years, getting to know the whole staff again and, starting from scratch. It's been fantastic for me.
Having to prove yourself, that's probably why
Yeah.
I never left. I don't want to have to prove myself again.
Yeah, and I'm sure you feel the same. Like, they trust you now, so there's something about being at a company long enough where they really trust you.
Absolutely. Sophia, you went out and started your own company. You're an entrepreneur, a founder. It's not easy to step out on faith and take a risk. What would you say has been the biggest payoff and the hardest lesson from entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest payoff, literally is getting paid. And that's like not something that I think people talk about. It's like, yay, we can be resilient, we can, be inspiring. And I think like the girl boss era, which I kicked off or wrote the book, was a time that was really needed. And now it's a time where we talk about being a boss, but being a boss so we can actually provide for ourselves and our families, and ultimately be in a position where you are a boss and you're able to pass along the things that you've learned. So it's not just about that, but it's also about bringing people up with you. The hardest lesson was probably, I think it started with the fact that, and for everyone in the room who may be more junior in your career, I think this is important to hear, is that as an entrepreneur, I started an eBay store, right, when I was 22 years old. I had no work experience outside of photo labs in record stores and shoe stores at the factory outlets, and had never experienced, back to leadership, I'd never experienced leadership, so I didn't have anything to model. And when you don't have anything to model, it's really hard to figure out what people need in the workplace to feel like they're taken care of and to feel like they're being nurtured, and to also hold them accountable, which I thought people were going to do and just show up and diagnose what needed to happen and go do it. But it's not that simple. And starting out without that experience didn't lay a foundation in some ways. And as that scaled with hundreds of people, it got messier because that foundation wasn't there. So I think it's incredibly important, there's a lot of ambitious women in this room, there's a lot of women who may want to start their own, businesses at some point, or even freelance. But before you do that, I think it's incredibly valuable to have the work experience and probably stay somewhere for more than 2 years.
Something that really stuck out to me when I was doing my research on these ladies is, Sophia, I love on your bio, your social platforms, and on her LinkedIn, she says that she returned the dress that she wore on the cover of Forbes magazine. I think that stuck out to me because, you guys obviously do have all the answers. You've made it to this point in your careers, but it goes to show that there are misconceptions about what it means to be in that position. What was your decision behind, placing that not only in your social platforms, but on your LinkedIn page?
Yeah, I think I just want to respond to that. Do you guys feel like you have all the questions answered? Like, is that okay? So I don't want anybody to make the assumption that because we're on the stage we have all the answers. Like, I certainly don't have a lot of the answers, and I'm asking myself them every day, which is important, to be curious and constantly learning. As far as putting that in my bio, one, I think it's funny. Two, it's a subtle flex. It was in 2016 when on paper my company was worth $350 million and I owned 80% of it. So you can do the math of on paper what I was worth. But at the time my company was really struggling. And Balmain wouldn't dress me, right? And Net-a-Porter doesn't care. So I was never going to wear it again. And I think it just shows people that, just because you're wearing whatever it was, a $6,000 thing on the cover of Forbes doesn't mean that you're necessarily winning. And I felt very alone at that time. It's really funny because I was literally alone. I was photographed alone and then superimposed into a group of 3 other women on the cover. So yeah, I think it's just like, it's funny and punny, and everything I try to do with a sense of levity, and not self-deprecation, but self-reflection, and also showing people that, like, again, just because that happened doesn't mean that I know shit or was even winning at the time.
Yeah. Oftentimes, if you don't know something, someone else does, and that leads me into networking. Sometimes it's most of the time a strong network and a mentor is often the key that led a person to success or career growth. It can be challenging. You don't want to come off as pushy, but you want to show that you're passionate and that you're invested, but you don't want to scare someone away. What advice would you all give to people who are looking to organically connect with people and authentically connect with people to build a network? And I'll give that to Anne.
Yeah, I mean, I think a focus of mine has always been connecting people. So even no matter what level you're at, you can make genuine relationships with people that you're working with, whether they're on the other side, whether they're a different company, whether they're your company. And I think keeping those in mind, making those genuine connections, finding those things that you have in common, and then connecting them with other people that you know is incredibly valuable. I think people really are excited about that. I think they're really valuable, and I think it also puts you in a great light for your networking because you know these people and you've made these connections and you've really provided authentic relationships for other people. That's always been very valuable for me in my networking.
Carolyn, I was going, yeah, no, the static.
Their fax machine?
We're going back into time.
Dial-up, early dial-up?
I was going to say, you're the master at networking. Miss Production Assistant to, executive role, what would you say was the most valuable lesson that you learned in networking during your process?
I think that first step of pushing myself outside my comfort zone to just approach Dungy Cohen, I think was a lesson in sort of just being unafraid to do something and getting, some unexpected, really positive results. And I think on the flip side of that, my door is always open. I'm excited by people that want to come in and ask questions and be supported. And so I think it was some of that. I didn't employ it too much, to be honest, but I think I found the right moments to do that and to be my own voice in my growth. But yeah, I think just kind of pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone to approach people that you want to learn from.
I remember at a certain point, we all do lunches, tons and tons of lunches. And I remember, it was 5 or 10 years later, I was like, oh my gosh, how have I been doing this for so long? It's like a first date every single time because you sit down and I think all of us you have to be a social person. You have to get out. You can't, especially in this generation where a lot of people like staying home. It's like, get out, get in the office, do lunches. To Ann's point, I think, find what you have in common, even if it's like a volleyball thing or something like that, or volunteer, definitely get out of your comfort level.
I also think in terms of networking, you can definitely go to big mixers and meet people, and for me, I find them quite draining. Actually not terribly, I'm social to a degree, but also have a lot of other stuff to do. But I also feel like, making movies in particular, but all of our businesses require wanting to work with people who you connect with individually, which is why those meals are important, or grabbing a drink with someone might be more additive than sort of a speed dating of meeting a bunch of people and taking a bunch of emails. So I try to make it feel as much not about work as possible, just because I am always in my phones and on email and we're all doing that. So it's am I going to connect with this person? Am I under, do I want to deal with them over the course of a year or many years, however long it takes to make a movie? That's the thing that I think actually makes networking less like networking and more like collaboration, when you get to know the people in a real way,
Absolutely.
Networking has been everything for me, and every time you walk into a different room, hopefully it's a relatively qualified room of people, but even if it's not, the opportunity, every time you meet someone, every person that you meet is an opportunity for another tangential thing to happen. I had this boyfriend who was really into psychedelics, and he had an experience on DMT where he saw probability cats, and it probably had something to do with quantum physics. But if you imagine a probability cat, and then probability cats like spawning off from each of those cats. It's like very, like, it's stuck in my head. But probabilities increase with every single thing that you do and every person that you meet. And if you're not doing that, if you're not making decisions and you're not putting yourself out there, the opportunity for something to change or for you to meet someone isn't there. And also, I would say, asking advice is the biggest gift you can give other people, because what you're telling them is, you're smart. I think you know something. And they're like, wow, thank you so much, right? I think a lot of people are afraid to ask advice, and all I do is spray advice. And I hope my friends and colleagues don't think that I'm, I want to be also a friend. But when you're moving up in your career, you don't really have a lot of time to feel your way around in the dark. And getting advice from people who have been there is take it with a grain of salt, but at the same time, it can really accelerate your career in ways that wouldn't necessarily happen if you didn't have that one data point that could get you from here to there.
Absolutely. So this next question is going to go to the crowd. Raise your hand if you have a mentor. Okay. Raise your hand if you are a mentor. Raise your hand if you are in need of a mentor. Okay. So connect. That's what you guys are all here for. Pivoting back to our panel, break down the importance of having a mentor and what mentorship did for you in your career. I also do not have a mentor. I am seeking one. So just to let you know, it's a common thing. I'm going to give that to Carolyn.
I will say I didn't really have a mentor, like a consistent mentor coming up, and not in any structuralized way. Like I would step out and ask people questions and get advice from time to time. And I'm almost envious now, I think, of kind of the formalized spaces WME's created for mentorship through ERGs and through other things. So I wouldn't be dwell on the fact that you might not have this consistent person in your life. I think it's great. But just to answer your question, I didn't really have one, but have now participated on the flip side as a mentor in those programs. And certainly, I think my lineage of kind of assistants over time, I've been mentors too in my team.
Rocky, I think also I said to you the other day, and you guys might have been on, I don't think you have to sort of sit there and think, oh my gosh, a mentor is at least 5 or 10 years older than me. They're at a certain level in their career. I do think that my mentors are, my posse of my girlfriends who were raised in the business together. I'm vulnerable with them. I ask questions. I give them advice. I think that if you're looking for a mentor, kind of break out of your mind exactly what that looks like, because it could be some of your dearest friends who have great advice for you that can kind of help you rise in your career.
I think it's also important to think about mentors versus sponsors, because there's mentors. I think I probably have several mentors who I look for in different aspects of my career, at my firm, outside of my firm, at production companies, who give great advice, who, I go to bounce, like you said, to bounce ideas off of. And then there's sponsors at my firm who are saying my name in rooms where I can't be at, that either I'm not in or that I haven't gotten to yet. And I think also, as being a boss, I seek to be a sponsor for the women and other people at my firm, where I can now say their name in rooms that they can't be in. So I think it's important to have both and understand the difference between those as you're coming up.
And I would agree as well. I think mentorship, I don't know that I actively thought I need a mentor, but there was one individual, her name's Allie Shermer. I interned for her, and she was sort of a stalwart in the business for a long time, and she understood what I needed, right? She understood that there were not many women who held her position. She was president of Lionsgate at the time. She would pull me into her office as an intern, and I would be in meetings with her. I was in graduate school at the time as well, but she knew and articulated things that I was afraid to say, which I think when you are a woman can sometimes feel a little bit icky, like claiming the idea of I want to be a boss, I want to be the boss. That can be a very like tough thing to sort of own. And I remember her in a meeting saying she wants to be me as the president. And I was like, like that was truly the moment where I was like, that's an interesting idea, maybe, and I still don't know. But, but that is very important in terms of a mentor sort of seeing you and being able to also see your potential and help you articulate that for yourself as well. So,
For sure. And this question goes back to you. In your time as a boss, what tips could you share on how to oversee and improve your team and their workflow? I know oftentimes we're constantly, as bosses, I'm sure you guys are constantly looking for different ways to improve your team and their work efforts. From your experience, what would you say is what hasn't worked and what has worked?
Sure. I mean, I think early on as a boss, I emulated the folks who were ahead of me, which is, I was polite, but I was firm. I was, exacting in a lot of ways. But as I mentioned earlier, the folks who I was learning from did not look like me necessarily. There were a lot of men, and particularly white men, and again, all of that is fine. However, I also realized as I was moving up that the message is as important as the messenger, right? And so I don't get necessarily to walk into rooms and articulate myself in the same way or be as firm. There are lots of things that people have in the ways of preconceived notions, whether they know that they engender them or not, that you encounter all the time. And I would realize things that I would say, and I thought I was being particularly articulate, someone next to me would say the exact same thing, and then suddenly it's like, oh my God, yeah, right, exactly right. And so, and I'd be like, what the heck just happened? And by the way, it still happens, right? So I think it encouraged me to not necessarily emulate those folks who were above me, but to find the thing that connected with me mostly, which is it's okay to bring empathy into the workplace, right? We don't need to be like feeling all over one another and oozing that all day long. However, how did that make you feel is not a bad question to ask your colleagues or the other people around. Asking people their thoughts on something, in addition to, of course, knowing your thoughts on the thing are probably going to be the definitive thing because you have to make the choices. That is fine. Like, what did you feel? Jump in with your thoughts. Please feel free to express yourself. It's because I recognized that when I was coming up, I did not necessarily feel privileged enough to speak in rooms or occupy spaces and all of that sort of thing. And so as a boss, I've had to evolve from what I saw to like what I wanted to become.
Yeah, I had a great mentor, a white man too, but he did do a very good job of articulating that. He was like, listen, I'm gonna have a different style than you. This is my style. Learn from it. Learn what I can teach you, obviously about the law, but also learn from my style of connecting with people and networking and building a business, and take what works for you and get rid of what doesn't work for you, because it's not all going to work for you. I'm not, like you said, I'm not going to walk into a room and I'm not going to get the same response you're going to get, but that's okay. And it's okay to put yourself into that leadership role and learn from all of the people around you and take the pieces that you like and not take the pieces that you don't like, and understand that it just doesn't work for everybody. And I think that was very valuable for shaping how I, chose to present myself going forward.
I think it's important to consider what the word boss means. So there's a lot of women, you guys have been in organizations, you've moved up in those organizations, you are the boss of other people. Not everybody wants to be the boss of other people. Not everybody is cut out to be a boss of other people, but you can be a boss. Like, you can build a career, you can build a business, and you don't necessarily have to be someone who manages people. I've realized that I don't like leading large teams. And so I've oriented my career now, after building a massive company. Now I have a venture fund. It's very small. I don't have any employees. And with all of the companies I invest in, I get to just send texts back and forth and make intros. I'm a very good early stage founder. So I've done it a few times. but once it actually starts working, I'm like bored, right? So I like to be in the weeds, and even though I understand leadership and I'm talking a lot about it, I don't like doing it because I like sourcing things. I like making introductions. I like giving advice. It doesn't scale super well, so I'll have to figure that out when I invest in, it's 9 companies right now, and it's gonna be a lot more. But not everybody has to want to do that. And I think it's important to be honest with yourself whether or not that's something that is for you, something that you want. And there are ways to navigate your career without necessarily having, 10 reports, right?
It's interesting you bring that up because I work in a big organization, and a lot of the men have sort of risen to a certain level, and they came up with me. And they were sort of like, I kind of miss doing the creative stuff. Like, I'm now so involved in management, HR, all that sort of stuff. So to your point, it's not right for everyone. And I keep sort of saying to these guys, like, well, come on back, dude. Like, I bet you can't really do that, So, but that's interesting.
Absolutely. I didn't know if
Yeah,
Kim-
no, I mean, I think there's like positional power and title and, hierarchical power and authority and bossness, but there's also just like being influenced by attracting and creating followership. And I think, you can, that can have the same impact, and to know that, you can have that impact without being anointed manager of people or, leader of team, is powerful. And I think also, yes, those are a lot of the time in organizations, the person that does the biggest deal or represents, or, I guess my business, but represents the biggest client, like all of a sudden is then like a people manager, and those are vastly different skills. And I got an executive coach a little bit earlier on in my career because I cared about not messing that part up. And so I think, but that's also okay to not want to be the admin person or someone that's creating space for other people to grow.
Law firms are the very same way. We tend to reward people for having the best clients by giving them people to manage, which is not necessarily the same skills. And so it's hard to, to break away from that because you want to be a leader, but it's hard to recognize that, these two things may not be the same, and it's okay to focus on the thing that you actually enjoy and are good at versus going after those titles and that constant elevation. So it's important to know yourself.
For sure. We're going to get into bosses from all backgrounds. Women represent 1 in 4 of the C-suite leaders, while women of color represent 1 in 16 leaders in the C-suite. And these are per findings from the organization Lean In. This question is for Mika. What's been your personal experience, and has a lack of diversity in the realm that you're in, has that led to the type of work that you do?
Sure, yeah, I mean...
or impacted, rather.
Oh, well, I mean, yes, 100%. I was just trying to think of my answer. Yeah, I mean, my experience has been, I remember working at an agency, as we all tend to do initially, and I remember I felt like I was doing everything right. I was still getting a handle of it, but I was doing all the things right, but I wasn't just connecting with my boss, right? I was the water's out and the things are printed every morning, and the blinds or whatever. Which are all the things they made you do. I don't know if they still do, but they made you do that at some point when you were coming up with an agency. We just weren't connecting, and I remember a friend of mine being like, well, he just doesn't see himself in you. And I think that also flipped a little white light switch on for myself, where it's not necessarily in a bad way, I probably don't remind him of his wife, himself, he just doesn't see that. And I think some of that ties into, of course, what we were talking about in terms of mentorship, but also in terms of people talk about gatekeeping, whether intentionally or unintentionally, largely, hopefully unintentionally, right? And that is why folks tend to matriculate upward, who tend to look similarly, because you can sort of understand, connect with whomever that might be. And so I think that certainly was something that I became very aware of, and again, generally worked for men, and with varying degrees of like connecting or not. And then I started a production company actually with Don Cheadle, and that was, the ethos of that company surrounded, you know, putting diversity in front of and behind the camera, whether LGBTQIA diversity, whether female diversity, or people of color, and folks who are historically marginalized, and that was the entire ethos of the company, and that, for me, felt very important, and obviously, for reasons that are quite obvious, important to me, right, in terms of being able to see myself and also elevate those voices, utilizing his platform and our deal. And that did quite well, and, you know, sort of when I decided to return to a studio a few years ago, that was very, very important, right? How do I take this thing that's important, at this smaller thing that I've built, and how do I figure out how to do the same thing at a much bigger, on a bigger stage with a bigger studio? And in the studios are not always like the most live, like ready to change places. They're often, you gotta convince people, you have to convince everyone all the time of a thing. And so how do I get folks to buy into this thing? And so yeah, that is very important to me. It's very important in the movies that I make. Of course, that does not pertain to every movie, right? Like diversity is not a thing that I'm like honing in on for every film. But yeah, if I can, you know, I'm running a very big movie. I don't even know if it's announced yet, so I probably can't even talk about it, but like that I'm very excited for and very proud of, that will do that on like the studio stage and will be theatrical. And, you know, then I'm also working on like, I don't know, Vertigo with Edgar Wright, and, you know, who knows what that looks like. So, you know, so anyway, yes, the short answer is yes, it has affected me.
I just wanted to know the entire panel's visceral response to hearing that, you know, 1 in 4, 1 in 16. Sophia, what's your just immediate?
Yeah, I think it's just like, where's the money going, right? Like, who's bringing women up with them? In venture capital, it's like 1.7% of entrepreneurs are like, companies are started by women. In the venture world, it's like very, very, I don't know what the statistic is, but it's under 10% of women who are general partners at firms. So it's just like, who are you hiring, right? Who are you promoting? Who are you mentoring? Because it's not just about getting the right people, the right people in the door and recruiting great talent that represents all backgrounds, but also how are you bringing them up with you? And the white guys, it's cool that the white guys are doing that, but it's like, are all the white guys doing that? Like, it's important for women to do that as well. And where, you know, it's harder for me to talk about like the larger organization and rising through an organization, but who you're investing in and who you're continuing to support. And also sourcing those deals for me as an investor is something that isn't that hard to do. I think some people are like, oh, well, it's hard to, you know, the candidates, whatever. And it's like, there's so many people out there. Like, there's plenty of candidates, women of color, to talk to recruit. I think people are incredibly lazy about it. So yeah, it's just like, who are you funding? And who are you bringing up for promotions?
Yeah, I agree. I think we've been very intentional in our group about hiring women, promoting women, fostering women, trying to get, you know, women. I think it's been I'm sure not unobviously, law firms at the top are also very male, and so getting women to stay in law firms and not go in-house. I mean, not that there's anything bad about going in-house, but to be able to have women in those positions, we have to have women who stay and who want to be in the law firm. So that's been a big focus of mine, is to make a place that people want to stay, that you can have a family. And we just had 2 of our associates just came back from maternity leave. So we made it a place where they wanted to stay, where they could build a practice, where they felt comfortable having children, and that they could be a lawyer and a mom. I think that's been a very big focus of mine, so we could make this a place where we can have more women in those leadership spots. But you can't have them in the leadership spots unless you bring them up and you give them those opportunities to be in those leadership spots. So you have to be very intentional about it, and you have to be very focused on that to make it happen.
Absolutely.
I also just want to qualify, I know I said 1.7% of venture goes to women. The amount of venture capital or funding that goes to women of color is like a fraction of that. So that was kind of the proxy I meant to use and clarify, which is like, it's like 0.0 something. It's very, very small. So yeah, we're talking about not just women, but also mostly women of color.
And I also think that what you were saying, Anne, about intentionality, I do feel like in the last few years, that's certainly been something that I feel like most studios, most of entertainment has really taken very seriously. I know that my studio certainly has. It's part of what was also a deciding factor, just in terms of not just DEI and for the sake of sort of looking for the sake of optics, but rather, are we really finding the right people to do the job, right? Like constantly checking how many female filmmakers we have working on things, how many, like that, these are things that were not conversations that I feel like were just openly had a number of years back, and it feels like it's part of the conversation now in like a very heartening way as well.
Absolutely. For sure. And we're almost out of time. I have a little juicy question. It might shake the table. It might shake the stage. It just might. Being disruptive for the greater good, and this is for the bosses from an employee standpoint, how can employees kind of bridge that gap? And if they want to present a new idea or they want to pitch something that they think might be better than your idea, how can they do that in an efficient way that in the end results in something that helps both parties? And I'll start with Tana.
I mean, I think I've been very lucky that I've had bosses who have taken, I mean, I'm kind of a little brutal. Like, I go in with ideas and I kind of badger, and they trust me. So usually, if I have research and I have, something to back what my opinion is, I usually can have them, approve it. For my team, they come in. I'm pretty open to, I want them to challenge me. I think it's important to challenge your boss. Most people don't, love doing that, but I think it is important to challenge your boss. But you have to come in with research. You have to have a point of view. I really, I feel like if you have, the trust of your boss as well, most bosses, I think, would kind of say, okay, if you feel that passionately, but as long as you have as long as you have data on it or something like that. But I think that that's a great thing. And also start with the smaller challenges and then work your way up to the bigger challenges.
She said, come correct.
I agree, though. I think the part of being a good boss is being open to that. I mean, I want to hear. If I'm doing something wrong, I definitely want to hear about it. If you have ideas that are different than mine, that's why you're on the team. I want to know what those ideas are. I want to know what we can do differently. If you have a different approach to something, tell me. Like, I think that's part of being a good boss, is just understanding those differences and wanting to hear about it and wanting to be challenged and looking for that. And who you hire, going back to the last question, hiring people who will do that, not just, yes, women or men, who are just going to say what you want to hear.
Absolutely.
I
Carol?
mean, if you want to be
I think being solutions oriented in your approach, highlighting a problem but also having a proposed solution is helpful to me, and I certainly implemented that approach. And yeah, I think I've done a lot of work to bring people into the conversation, sort of what you were saying, advocate for them in rooms that they're not necessarily in, because I think there's like a lack of transparency for whatever reason, to be elusive about your position or whatever it may be, and to not just bring them into the conversations about what's happening or the deal we're trying to do, but like the strategy and like what does next year look like for this team is kind of what I've tried to implement.
Absolutely.
if you want to be promoted, doing your job isn't enough, right? It's doing more than that. So hopefully you're working for someone who understands that and appreciates it. It's like table stakes to do your job if you want to get further in your career, showing that you have ideas and enthusiasm for what it is that the company's doing, and having that sense of almost entitlement to where my ideas are good. This is something that, I want to share with you. I think for the most part, it's well received. I think it's important, similar to like product market fit in a startup, to really understand what the company's doing, who it is that their customer is, what it is, what the strategy of the company is, right? So a lot of people can show up with ideas that are like, I'm excited about this, or this will advance my career because it looks good in my portfolio. Like a lot of creatives will do that, but it's not something that necessarily matches what's right for the business. And hopefully someone in the organization has given you some objective view of what the company's doing and what good is, and set you up to present something that's qualified that can possibly make an impact on the company.
Absolutely. And make it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I always want to hear the feedback. It's tough, right?
She's like the door's closed.
I mean, no. I mean, the reality is like, you're running with an idea, and someone's like, well, I think it should be X, and sometimes you're like, well, I think it should be, you know what I mean? Like, that is, I think, the gut reaction that a lot of people have. But I do know that you should hear all sides, right? And I have blind spots that I'm not aware of as well, and things that I'm not thinking about. I mean, I find Gen Z, who's like the future, like all of their stuff really interesting. I know that I don't understand half of their viewership patterns or how they talk to, like, I have made so many friends who are Gen Z leaders, which is like a whole thing, who like just tell me all of this stuff that does not make sense to me, and I'm like, wow, like that's how you guys think, that's so wild. But but it's also important because industries have to evolve to continue to capture and continue to inspire these younger generations who will eventually also be leaders, and they will not all be millennials just sort of, in our little frame of minds or, what have you. So, that's my thinking on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get out of here, from the end back to me, and quickly just describe what it means to be a power woman in one sentence.
That's not fair.
I think understanding the responsibility of being a power woman, it's one thing to be one, it's another to understand how everything you say and everything you do, other people are going to be impacted by, and that as much as you don't necessarily want that, like I didn't really want that responsibility, if you want to be a boss, it's something you have to understand and something that you have to model.
Absolutely. Tana.
Okay, so this might be the lamest thing, but I kind of feel like as a power woman, it's so important to motivate people. And, I hope that I do that for my team, and I hope I do it for people on the inside and the outside.
Absolutely. Mika.
That was a good one. I mean, I think it's okay to be exacting and not a jerk, right? Like, I would like this, but also not be a jerk about it. I think you can do both things, and that's what it is, I think, to me, to be a power woman.
For sure.
I'm just drafting off you guys essentially, but I think, I think driving influence by being who you are, to show sort of diversity and paths to leadership or being a power woman.
Absolutely. And
Yeah, I mean, I think it's building on what I said before. It's being that sponsor for women behind you, and pulling your hand back and pulling people up with you, because if you want to build what you want, if you want it to look different in the future, you have to make it look different now. So I think that's what it means to me.
absolutely. Give these ladies a round of applause.